My topic today is about loneliness and true love, healing the family of the 21st century. The sexual revolution promised us equality and freedom and fun. I'm here today to challenge this widespread belief. Let me put it bluntly. The generation before you, my generation, the baby boom generation, has left you a mess. So I want to begin with an apology. I'm sorry for anything and everything that I personally have done to contribute to our current sexual culture, and I apologize on behalf of my generation. I hope to challenge you to rethink the platitudes and excuses that my generation offered you for the sexual culture we created. I can tell you from experience that those rationalizations start to ring hollow after years of use. And I think we can do better, much better than we're doing now. I hope to leave you with some ideas of how you can contribute something positive, no matter what your situation personally might happen to be. Now, I want to begin, though, by just having you do a little thought experiment. Now, the people of your age, you're close enough in age that you can still identify with a child, right? But you're old enough that you'll be able to identify with a parent as well, at least in part, right? So I want to put you in an imaginative situation here of being a little child on Christmas morning. And you come down, well, let's see, should it be you? No, let's pretend it's you and your spouse. Okay, can you imagine that? You and your spouse, most of you aren't married yet, but you and your spouse sitting on the sofa. On Christmas Day, you've got the Christmas tree already, and all the gifts are there and everything. And the children come one child, let's just pick one child. Child comes bounding down the steps, and they look at that Christmas tree, and they're so excited. And then they look at you and your spouse, and then they look at the Christmas tree, and then they turn their back on the Christmas tree, and they come running over to the sofa, and they throw themselves onto that sofa and sit with you and your spouse, and they say, "Mommy and Daddy, I love you so much. I don't care about the presents. I'm just happy to be here with you. Your love is enough for me, Mommy and Daddy. Give the presents to the other kids." You didn't do that when you were a kid? Nobody did that? Dang. You told me these were good kids. What the heck? I thought y'all did that. Well, you can imagine that child. You've probably never witnessed that child. I get it, that you've never seen that. But you can imagine it. If that child were real, wouldn't that be your favorite kid ever, if you were the parent? I mean, wouldn't you just want to give that child everything possible, right, if a child acted like that? So I want you to keep that child in mind. And at the end of the talk, I'll tell you where you can find kids like that. So, as I say, the sexual revolution promised us equality, freedom, and fun. And I agree that we're freer in the sense that we get to do what we want. We have fewer structural constraints on our behavior. But new controls and constraints have come into being as a direct consequence of the sexual revolution. We can't manage the consequences of our behavior entirely on our own, and so therefore we need the help of the state to help us manage the ill effects of the sexual revolution. Besides, giving freedom such a high priority has compromised other important values that we have, such as relatedness and friendship and closeness. For example, there's an article in social psychology called The Age of Anxiety: Birth Cohort Changes in Anxiety and Neuroticism Between 1952 and 1993. You guys love this social science stuff? I love this stuff. I'm sorry, I didn't bring a graph or anything, so you can relax about that. So the point of this article is that it shows that children's anxiety and neuroticism have increased between 1952 and 1993 so much that the average child in the 1980s reported more anxiety than child psychiatric patients in the 1950s. A study called The Paradox of Declining Female Happiness also shows that women's happiness has declined steadily, both absolutely and relative to men, between the 1970s and the turn of the 21st century. And so what's happening is, in spite of all the freedom we have evidence of unhappiness. Now, I'm going to deal with just one of the social issues, one that you might think is a done deal: no-fault divorce, or what I like to call unilateral divorce. I choose this issue to talk with you about for a couple of reasons. First, no-fault divorce has been in place for about 40 years. That's long enough to get a good perspective on how sexual revolutionary changes ripple through the whole society. Second, the rationale for no fault and the results of no fault illuminate some very different ideas of freedom. Presented to the public as a great increase in personal freedom, removing the presumption of permanence from marriage has extended the reach of the state into the private lives of law-abiding citizens in ways that would otherwise be unimaginable and intolerable. But before I talk about divorce, let me explain what I mean by a social structure and why it matters for freedom. Social institutions provide structure, and you might say guardrails for our behavior. There's no denying it. Social structures do constrain people's choices and behaviors to some extent. This is no doubt the insight that has led people to want to dismantle social institutions and structures of all kinds. But some kinds of structures actually make us better off and, in fact, more free. Marriage, for instance, we can look at it as a social institution. So let's admit it straight out. Marriage does provide boundaries and constraints on people's behavior. You have sex with your spouse and no one else. You have to admit that would solve a lot of problems right there. People did that. You have sex with your spouse and no one else. Number two, you take care of your children that are born to you and your spouse. Number three, you respect the parenting decisions of other families. Even if your next door neighbor is a knucklehead and you have a doctorate in child psychology or something, you leave them alone. And finally, until the advent of no-fault divorce, you stay married unless somebody does something really awful. Those constraints certainly do chafe under some circumstances. But on the other hand, those boundaries provide a zone of freedom. As long as the couple behaves within these social structural limits, they can do pretty much anything they want. Nobody monitors their household division of labor, their eating habits, their spending habits, or their sex lives. Nobody tells them how to treat each other or forces them to be polite. Nobody tells them how many children to have or how to raise those children. Some couples will treat one another with respect and love. Others will nag and fuss and complain. And unless they do something really egregious, nobody will bother them. Now, I would argue that this is a perfectly sound, sensible social structure, one that would be difficult to improve on at the structural level. But in 1968, California eliminated the fault basis for divorce, arguing that the government had no compelling interest for forcing people to remain in loveless marriages. The few dissenters were dismissed with the rhetorical question, how can your next-door neighbor's divorce possibly hurt you or your marriage? On the basis of a handful of studies, experts assured the public that children would be better off if unhappy parents separated in a simple and painless way. If the parents are happy, the children will be happy. These rosy forecasts proved to be incorrect in every particular. The shift to no-fault divorce was not a minor change, but a huge social shift. No-fault did not simply reduce the cost of divorce to the handful of people who would have gotten divorced in any case. No-fault changed the incentives for everyone, and thereby changed the institution of marriage for everyone. The best estimate is that the introduction of no-fault increased the divorce rate by 10%, and that it changed the behavior of millions of people. And of course, we now know that divorce and the ending of a low-conflict marriage can be extremely devastating for children. To show you that the presumption of permanence in marriage had many desirable features, let me tell you a bit about growing up in the 1950s. You have no doubt been told that this was an era of oppression of women in abusive, loveless marriages and the confinement of men to dreary conformist jobs. Now, I don't know what it was like to be an adult in those days, but I can tell you something about what it was like to be a child. Our mothers and fathers were there. Our fathers went to work every morning, came home every night, and were sober most of the time. Our mothers took care of us without hovering over us. We slept in the same bed every night. We didn't shuttle between two households. Everything we needed for our homework or our school project was right there at our mom's house, which was our dad's house, which was the only house we had. We didn't have to worry about how to behave around our mother's boyfriends or our father's girlfriends. Our mothers didn't bring a parade of boyfriends through the house. Our fathers didn't make fools of themselves, remarrying a string of women whom everyone else could see were gold diggers. It was unthinkable that our parents would present us with new lovers to whom we would have responsibilities and with whom we would have relationships. We sometimes saw our parents quarrel, but we seldom wondered whether these quarrels would mean the end of their marriages and the end of our lives as we had known them. We had brothers and sisters. When our moms had a new baby, that brother or sister was not a symbol of our mom's new relationship with a new husband, an unmistakable and final sign that our parents would never get back together again. Sure, we sometimes felt neglected by our parents' preoccupation with the new baby, but we didn't have to deal with the feeling that many of today's children must face, the feeling that the new baby completes and solidifies the new marriage, and that we are unwelcome leftovers from an old relationship that is best forgotten. Each new baby became a permanent part of our family. We didn't worry about getting too attached to a new half-sibling or step-sibling who might disappear if an adult relationship broke up. We all grew up together with the same set of brothers and sisters for our entire childhood. Kids I grew up with never had judges deciding where we would go to school or church. We spent Christmas Day and Thanksgiving Day with both parents. Our moms might say, "Don't tell Dad," if she'd spent too much money on something. But our moms never asked us to keep signs of wealth hidden from our dads when we went to visit them, for fear that this would upset their financial arrangements. We were not asked to perjure ourselves by one parent against another. I don't know anyone from my childhood who ever went to family court, even once. Those of us who grew up in the 1950s had no idea what we were overthrowing when we rebelled against our parents, when we indulged ourselves by taking advantage of the new laws. For the first time, spouses could abandon a blameless spouse for any reason or no reason and never give an account of themselves. Quite obviously, this system benefits the spouse who wants to renege on their marriage vows at the expense of the faithful spouse. No-fault divorce was supposed to lower the costs of divorce for the handful of people whose marriages had broken down. In fact, it induced a whole range of new bad behaviors that would have been unimaginable in earlier times. Compared with the problems children face today, we were unbelievably fortunate. No-fault divorce changed the underlying structure of marriage as a social institution. It replaced the presumption of permanence with a presumption of impermanence. The old system accommodated the exceptions to the rule of permanence without undermining that underlying presumption of permanence. Today, no one, male or female, young or old, of any religion or no religion, no one can count on any particular marriage lasting for a lifetime. No-fault divorce also removed the presumption of fidelity inside marriage. Since there is no such thing as a fault, there's no marital fault, that means sex with somebody else while you're married doesn't count as having any kind of penalty. And so the presumption that you were faithful to your spouse, the social sanctions associated with that disappeared and obviously induced a whole new realm of bad behavior. Now, many of you will not be surprised to hear what I have said because many of you have experienced this in one way or another or observed it for yourselves. But you may not have noticed that no-fault divorce has also led to an increase in the power of government over individual private lives. This is because no-fault divorce frequently means unilateral divorce. That is to say, one party wants to get a divorce against the wishes of the other who would like to stay married. Therefore, the divorce must be enforced. The coercive machinery of the state is wheeled into action to separate the reluctantly divorced party from the joint assets of the marriage, typically the home and the children. And so family courts tell fathers how much money they have to spend on their children and how much time they get to spend with them. They'll tell mothers whether they get to move and how far they get to move. Courts rule on which parents get to spend Christmas Day with the children, down to and including the exact time of day they have to turn the child over to the other spouse. I have even heard of family court judges deciding on a teenage girl's prom dress because the quarreling parents couldn't work it out for themselves. Involving the family court in the minutia of family life like this is hardly the behavior of a night watchman minimum government state. We do not permit any other agent of the government to intervene in people's private business so intimately, so frequently, and so routinely. People under the jurisdiction of the family courts can have virtually all of their private lives and their finances subject to its scrutiny. So I'll agree that we're more free on the front end. We're more free to leave marriage without cause or accountability. But we're less free on the back end as the state steps in to manage the consequences of the breakup of the little society of the family. Thus, the social experiment of no-fault divorce, which was accepted as an expansion of personal liberty, has resulted in the unprecedented intrusion of the state into the private lives of ordinary law-abiding citizens. It has resulted in an unprecedented blurring of the boundaries between the private and the public. The social pathologies that result from family dissolution and the consequent failures of some families to form are also very expensive to the taxpayer. And so if you have any fiscal conservative friends, you can mention this to them, that the cost of families failing to form, the cost of family breakdown, has been estimated to be on the order of $112 billion per year. That's the taxpayer costs. That doesn't include the personal family costs and the heartbreak. $112 billion per year in taxpayer money, ladies and gentlemen, that's the GDP of New Zealand. This is not chump change that we're talking about here. So whether you're a civil libertarian or a fiscal conservative, there's something here to be troubled by in no-fault divorce, even if you're not religious at all, even if you're not reading Matthew 19 and Mark 10 as closely as our non-religious neighbors would be reading them. Now, sometimes when I speak this way about growing up in the 1950s, people assume that I'm indulging in some kind of nostalgic, naive exercise. But I assure you, in spite of all that I've said here, there were problems in the family of the 1950s. After all, these were the people who were rushing to the new liberation movements of the 60s. Well, what were they running from? Quarreling, jealousy, anger, selfishness, family secrets, pettiness, shame. Well, what was the solution to these problems? More patience, less self-regard, more telling the truth in love, more generosity, more appreciation, more gratitude. The women's liberation movement in particular gave us more things to quarrel about, more grievances, more grudges, more permission to focus on ourselves, easier exit options, and more reasons to nag our husbands, which I personally did not need. More excuses to nag my husband. I could do that all by myself without any coaching. What we really needed was more love, all of us. More love from parent to child, from child to parent, and above all, between the parents, between husbands and wives. We did not realize when we rushed for the exits that all our faults came with us, and roughly half the problems of the earlier relationships. The problems and the faults just played themselves out in different arenas, in the family courts, in the workplace, in the new families that we kept creating and breaking apart. The structure of the family was fine. What we lacked was not freedom, but love. Let me briefly define what I mean by the sexual revolution, since I've used this term. There are two main points that I associate with the sexual revolution, and these refer back to the talk that I gave yesterday, which I think you'll be able to see on Biola's website later when it's posted. The sexual revolution has 2 points. First, the idea that it is possible and desirable to separate sex from procreation, and both sex and procreation from marriage. The idea that it's possible to separate sex, procreation, and marriage from one another. And you can see how no-fault divorce plays into that. Second idea is the idea that men and women are completely interchangeable. Completely interchangeable, that there are no significant differences between men and women. They're all socially constructed, and it's a matter of social justice that we wipe out any evidence of differences between men and women. Well, there are a lot of problems with both of those ideas. As I mentioned, I talked about some of those in my talk from yesterday, which you can go watch or listen to. But what I want to say now is that there are many, many walking wounded souls out there as a result of the sexual revolution. And the Ruth Institute has recently started a website that we call Kids Divorce Stories. And at Kids Divorce Stories, people can go there and write down about what it was like for them when their parents divorced. For example, one woman named Jennifer wrote in that her stepfather would come home from trips with gifts for her mother and gifts for the daughter that they had had together, but no gifts for Jennifer. Another woman named Claire wrote in and said that her mother consistently made fun of the statistics that showed that children are harmed by divorce. Her mom used to say, well, you kids turned out fine. But what Claire heard was a blanket prohibition on ever bringing up the subject of how much she missed her father or how much the divorce had impacted her. There was no space in the family system for her to express those feelings. And then I think about a little girl I know named Erin. Erin lives with her grandmother. Erin's mother never married, but she has 2 children with 2 different men. Erin was 6 years old when I knew her, and she's the eldest of her mother's children. Erin and her family are an example of what we now call an alternative family form. What this expression means to convey is that having children outside of lifelong marriage is not particularly consequential. It's just another lifestyle choice that we ought to celebrate and never, never judge. Demographers describe Erin's family with the term multi-partner fertility. Think about that, multi-partner fertility. They came up with this term because they discovered that there's more going on in a family like Erin's than simply non-marital childbearing. When a woman has a child out of wedlock, the odds are very high that her next child will also be out of wedlock and with a different man. The changing and churning of partners has turned out to be more significant than simply having a baby without a husband. And so by some standards, Erin's in pretty good shape. She lives with her grandma who loves her, not in foster care. She's never been abused by her mom's boyfriends, to the best of my knowledge, and she's doing okay in school. But let me tell you just one fact about Erin. When their families get together for Christmas or Thanksgiving, her mom will come over to Grandma's house with her new boyfriend and with the new baby that they had together. And after every one of these family get-togethers, Erin will act out with angry and unmanageable behavior. She typically will wet her bed every night for a week, because those family gatherings are reminders that her mother doesn't want her. Every holiday stirs up the feeling that her mother doesn't love her. If she were old enough to put it into words, she might tell you that she feels like a leftover from a previous relationship. That is what multi-partner fertility looks like to a child. That is what an alternative lifestyle means to a child. As a member of the baby boom generation, I want you to know that I do not accept these situations as normal. I will never accept it as normal, no matter how frequently it occurs and no matter what anyone else says. This is not normal. This should not be accepted as normal. Now, the way forward. Weakening the marriage institution has meant that marriage cannot provide structure for people's lives, and the social history of the last 50 years bears this out. Every increase in freedom has turned out to initiate another episode of lawlessness. But lawlessness turns out to impose constraints of its own. Children suffer from loss of connection with their parents. Parents suffer from the loss of connection with their children. And adults find themselves ever more lonely and unable to sustain meaningful relationships. Look at the issues we now expect young people to figure out on their own through trial and error. They, that is you all, must figure out how to conduct yourselves prior to marriage, how to choose a spouse, how to behave during marriage, when to start a family, how to raise that family. No offense to any of you guys, but really, immaturity is rampant among the young. By the time you figure this all out on your own, you'll be menopausal and miserable. There's a lot of errors you can make here, you know? So I'm going way out on a limb here, and I'm going to say there was nothing structurally wrong with the family of the 50s. The presumption of permanence was a good thing. The presumption of sexual exclusivity inside marriage was a good thing. The presumption of openness to life was a good thing. The benefits that the sexual revolution claims for itself could have all been obtained some other way. For example, women were already expanding their participation in the labor force and higher education, even without any radical change like no-fault divorce. The problems of the family could have been addressed without undermining the structure. What the family needed was more love, more truth, less shame, more telling the truth in love. We didn't need a sexual revolution. What we needed was a love revolution. We didn't need sexual license with less and less regard for the impact of our behavior on others. What we needed was a greater sense of love, in the classic sense of love, not some Hallmark greeting card, warm, fuzzy, nothing, fluff. What we needed was love, which means to will and to do the good of the other. That's what love is really about. Now, everyone can participate in the love revolution starting right now. We don't have to wait for any grand changes in public life, any changes to the Supreme Court or Congress or anything like that. Anyone and everyone can be an agent for positive change within their own families. You can be the one who offers forgiveness when someone hurts you. You can be the one who takes the first step of making amends when someone has hurt you or when you have hurt someone else. You can be the one to reach out in friendship to someone who is hurting. I'm often struck by how much of the hookup culture is fueled by loneliness. I talk on a lot of campuses, religious and non-religious alike, and of course the hookup culture is a big factor on many of these campuses. And I'm struck always by how much that hookup scene is fueled by a desire to be loved, a desire to matter to someone. The sexual experience very seldom delivers on all these promises. How different campus life would be, how different young singles' life would be if people had more friends, more genuine friends, and fewer hookups. The sexual revolution would run out of steam because everyone needs friendship. Everyone, male or female, straight or gay, would benefit from non-sexual friendships where nobody's worried about the other person hitting on them. You can be the person who reaches out to others, offering genuine friendship. Now, I hope that my words will ring in your ears and give you something to think about after I've left your campus and gone back to San Diego. The truth is that the ancient Christian teachings on marriage, family, and human sexuality are far more humane than any of the modern alternatives we're being offered. The solution to the chaos of our sexual culture is right under our noses. Become the kind of person who can love and be loved, the kind of person who can both repent and forgive. This is a good personal policy, no matter what the social structures might be. And this is the best of what the Christian church has always taught. Which brings me back to that little kid on Christmas morning. Remember that little kid? Well, here's where you're going to find that little kid. That little child is you. And the people sitting on the sofa are not your parents. The people sitting on the sofa is Jesus our Lord. And can't we say to him, in all truth and in all good conscience, Jesus, your love is enough for me. Your love is enough for me. You've already saved me. Jesus, love those other kids more than you love me, because your love's already enough. I don't need any more. I'm happy just to be here with you. Love my mom who's on her third marriage. Love her more than you love me. Love my roommate who's going through goodness knows what. Love him more than you love me. Your love is enough for me. I ask nothing for myself. Wouldn't you be his favorite kid ever if you talked like that? You know, wouldn't that prayer totally please our Lord if you talk to him like that? Of course it would. And not only that if I promise you, if you pray like that, it will begin to come to your mind what you can do for that other person. It'll just come to your mind. There'll be a path. There'll be something you can do that you just hadn't thought of. It'll become clear if you pray with the true good of the other person in mind. So I just want to close by telling you that my organization, which Scott alluded to, my organization, the Ruth Institute, is an interfaith educational organization, and we're working to promote lifelong married love because we see that permanence in marriage is an image of Christ's love for us, his church. The Ruth Institute is working to restore the connection between sex, procreation, and marriage because we believe the connection between sex and procreation is an image of the fruitful love, the overwhelmingly generous and fruitful love that God has for each one of us. And the Ruth Institute honors the differences between men and women, seeing those differences as a gift from God. The differences between men and women are a sign that we need one another, and ultimately that we are dependent on Almighty God, our Creator. So back in the back, I have a sign-up, and I invite you to sign up for our newsletter back there on the clipboards, or up here in the front, I have it. And so you too can become a member of the True Love Revolution. We also have a little bit of literature back there for you. And given enough time and attention, your generation may be able to create more humane and sustainable social structures. Together, we may be able to heal the family of the 21st century.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.